I was brushing my teeth when it happened. The water sputtered like a dying animal, coughed through the pipes with a sound that didn't belong in a civilized home, and then turned the color of old dishwater, cloudy, sickly wrong. The smell hit me a second later, not sharp like chlorine or sulfur, but murky and organic, like something dead and forgotten had decomposed inside my plumbing. I gagged. Reflexively, I spat into the sink, then stared at the drain as if it could explain itself. But it didn't. It just gurgled, indifferent. That was the same morning I opened my water bill and nearly dropped my coffee. It had tripled. Not doubled. Tripled. And that was when I felt it, not the panic of a broken pipe, not the annoyance of a billing error, but a crawling, prickling awareness under the skin. Something wasn't right. Something didn't add up. I live on the edge of town, where paved streets give way to horse trails and the boundaries between neighbors are more spiritual than physical. We don't have sidewalks. We don't have a water grid. We have wells, tanks, and the unspoken agreement to handle our own problems. I built my water system myself, dug deep into the earth, filtered every drop, backed it with a reserve tank for the dry seasons, and buried every line like I was hiding treasure. And that's what it was, a treasure. My own water, pure and unbothered. Until it wasn't. At first, I blamed the usual suspects. Old valves, maybe a burst joint somewhere beneath the barn. But the numbers didn't lie. My consumption had spiked in ways that couldn't be explained by an extra shower or a leaky faucet. That's when I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I listened. Not to the pipes or the gauges, but to the ground itself. I stood at the edge of my property, by the fence that divides my land from my neighbors, and I felt it, a faint, constant hum. Not loud. Not obvious. But there. Something was running. Pulling. Drawing from a source that should have been silent. That was the moment the suspicion snapped into place like a puzzle piece you didn't realize you'd been holding. Someone was siphoning from my line. And not just a trickle. This was industrial. Consistent. Calculated. Now let me tell you about Karen. Every neighborhood has one. Ours came with a crown she gave herself, and an HOA she weaponized like a holy book. I don't belong to the HOA. My land sits a sliver outside the official boundary. On paper, I'm free. In practice, freedom was a concept Karen didn't understand. She sent newsletters weekly, and they landed on my porch like unsolicited sermons, always addressed to resident, as if I were some rogue element she hadn't yet absorbed into her empire. Once, she told me my mailbox didn't reflect the tone of the neighborhood. I laughed. I thought that would be the end of it. But Karen doesn't let things go. She cultivates control like a garden, watering it with gossip, pruning with passive aggression. Her lawn was a sea of green, even during drought restrictions. Her backyard sparkled with fountains, twinkled with fairy lights. She hosted brunches for women with matching visors and moral superiority complexes. And my water line, the one I buried 20 feet from her shed, was now mysteriously dry. What would you have done? Called the sheriff? Filed a complaint with a board you don't even belong to? Would they believe you, or think you were just another grumpy landowner with a bone to pick? And what if you were wrong? That's when I decided to stop guessing. I installed an old rancher's trick, a pressure gauge just past the barn. Watched it like a hawk for 3 nights. Each time I shut off every valve in my house and barn, and each morning, without fail, the pressure dropped. Someone was drinking from my well in the dead of night. And I needed to see who. So I got clever. I hollowed out a fake rock, one of those lawn ornaments no one questions, and buried a trail camera inside, pointed right at the fence line that separated my land from Karen's empire. Then I waited. 2 days later, at 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. The motion sensor had caught something. I opened the feed, half expecting a raccoon or maybe Chuck, Karen's handyman, with a truck full of overpriced junk and a smirk that always felt a little too familiar. It was Chuck. But he wasn't just walking. He was working. With a flashlight clenched in his teeth, he crept across Karen's yard, ducked behind her shed, and spent 20 minutes fiddling with something out of sight. When he re-emerged, he was holding PVC pipe and a hose splitter, evidence clear as daylight. I stared at the screen, breath held. He didn't even bother to hide it. It was routine for him, like clocking in at a job he wasn't qualified for. And just like that, the puzzle completed itself. Karen's backyard oasis. Her green lawn. The suspiciously full kiddie pool. Her car washed with abandon while the rest of us rationed. She was running her entire property on my water. And not just stealing it, she was celebrating it. Hosting garden parties while my own grass turned brittle. Washing her patio as I patched up dry irrigation lines. This wasn't neglect. This was theft. Disguised in pearls and polite newsletters. I confronted her, of course. Not with rage. Not yet. I knocked on her door and handed her a flash drive with the footage. She opened the door with a smile she reserved for people she thought she could out-talk, out-maneuver. I told her someone had tapped into my water line. Her eyes twitched just slightly. She laughed. Said I must be mistaken. Closed the door mid-sentence. No denial. No outrage. Just dismissal. That told me everything. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and looked out at my land. The cattle tank sat near the barn, crusted with the remains of last season's runoff. Half full of feed-mixed sludge, fermented by time and neglect. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was disgusted, but because I was inspired. What if the theft continued? What if the thief thought the line was still clean? What would you do if someone kept taking from you, smiling while they did it, and calling you selfish for noticing? Would you fight back? Would you call a lawyer, draft a cease and desist, engage in legal fencing that might take months? Or would you do what I did, reach for the one thing no entitled neighbor expects? Creativity. And sludge. So tell me, where are you watching this from? Your living room? A quiet office? A backyard not yet invaded? Because out here, on the edge of nowhere, justice doesn't come in a suit or uniform. Sometimes it comes through a hose. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice stinks. Do you want to know what happens next? Then stay with me. The real story is just beginning. I didn't sleep the night after I closed that door on Karen. Not from fear or anger, but from the quiet electricity of preparation. That kind of stillness before a storm, when the wind holds its breath and the trees whisper secrets to the dark. I lay there with the blueprint of my land in my head, tracing every line of pipe I had laid with my own hands years ago. I remembered every turn, every joint, every inch of the system because I built it not from convenience, but from necessity. And now, someone else was treating it like a free tap at the county fair. That wasn't just theft. That was war. The cattle tank was an afterthought for years, a leftover from when I tried keeping steers during one of the driest seasons on record. What water that remained was a viscous, brown stew of feed remnants, hay dust, and microbial sludge that could make even a raccoon gag. The idea hit me while I was pouring coffee, looking out the kitchen window toward the barn where the tank sat in silent disgrace. If they were going to steal from me, maybe I ought to make it worth their regret. Not with poison, not with violence. With consequence. The kind they couldn't ignore, the kind that lingered in carpets and flower beds long after the last drop had sprayed. So I got to work. Not alone. I called in a favor from Dale, a ranch friend who owed me 2 winters of broken fence repairs and a freezer full of venison. He came over the next evening, eyebrows raised and grinning, when I told him the plan. We traced the line, quietly, methodically, until we found the point of intrusion. Chuck had been thorough, but not clever. The connector was rudimentary, a Y-splitter piggybacked onto the secondary feed line that ran under a thin stretch of fencing near Karen's shed. It was exactly where I suspected, buried just deep enough to escape a casual glance, shallow enough for a midnight operation. Dale looked at it, spat into the dirt, and said, "She's got some nerve." We shut the clean feed valve and diverted the line using an underground bypass routed to the cattle tank. The whole operation took us 5 hours, not because it was difficult, but because I wanted it seamless. Untraceable. We used camouflage piping, repacked the dirt meticulously, reseeded the patch of disturbed grass, and even rerouted a sprinkler line to make it look like natural irrigation. When it was done, Dale flipped the test valve and laughed so hard he had to sit down. Brown sludge came bursting out like chocolate syrup on steroids, thick, chunky, unholy. We sealed it up, reset the trail camera to a new angle, and waited. That weekend arrived like a countdown timer. Karen's backyard came alive on Saturdays with the sound of curated laughter, clinking wine glasses, and the unmistakable smugness of people pretending to care about the environment while standing ankle-deep in stolen water. I made popcorn. I sat by the window. News struck. The sound was faint at first, just the mechanical sigh of a pressure release, and then came the scream. Not loud, but sharp. Panicked. I stood up just in time to see it. A geyser of brown, foamy sludge erupting from her garden hose, splattering across her pristine white porch and the legs of a decorative table set. Guests scattered. One woman slipped, another vomited into a potted hydrangea. Karen flailed backwards, tripping over her own tulips, dress stained in uneven, molasses-colored streaks. She tried to shut it off, but the pressure held. The backup tank, ironically, had more than enough to finish what it started. I didn't laugh. I smiled, but not out of cruelty. Out of balance. Because some lessons aren't learned through confrontation, they're learned through immersion. Karen had been swimming in entitlement for years. Today, she got baptized in consequence. That night, the neighborhood was quiet. No party leftovers dragged across sidewalks. No Karen monologues echoing from her gazebo. Even the dog she usually forgot to leash stayed silent. The calm was suspicious, like the world holding its breath again. I knew it wouldn't last. Sunday came with clouds. Mid-morning, I heard footsteps on my gravel driveway. Purposeful. Angry. I recognized the rhythm, white sandals slapping dry earth like war drums. Karen didn't knock. She pounded. I opened the door slowly, calmly, and she exploded. Accusations poured out of her like steam from a cracked kettle. Biological sabotage, endangerment of the community, a personal vendetta that violated something she called moral municipal trust. I listened, arms folded, nodding as if I were a student in a lecture on absurdity. When she finally paused to breathe, I asked her a single question. Had she filed a request to connect to my private system? Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She blinked. Then pivoted, said she had a surplus of grass to water and that I, a landowner with excess, should feel obligated to share. That was the moment the comedy of the situation curdled into something darker. She truly believed it. In her world, proximity was permission. Ownership was optional. I told her plainly. I had footage, readings, property lines, and a witness. Her handyman had been recorded in the act. She tried to blame him, said he must have misunderstood her instructions. I shut the door mid-excuse. Behind me, the kettle on the stove started to whistle. Timing, I thought, was everything. What followed over the next week was less retaliation and more performance art. Karen flooded the community Facebook page with long posts about resource hoarding and rural selfishness. She printed flyers, actual paper flyers, and stuffed them into mailboxes accusing me of hoarding the people's water. She stood near my fence, arms crossed, sermonizing to her gardening club like a dethroned dictator. I ignored her, but my cameras didn't. One night she tried to peek over the fence, slipped in the runoff mud, and landed flat on her back. I saved the clip. Didn't post it. Yet. Instead, I went to the county utilities office. Sat down with a man named Mason, who had been writing water permits longer than Karen had been weaponizing bylaws. He laughed when I showed him the footage. Said what she did was not only unethical, but borderline criminal. Tapping into a private system across property lines without a permit? Fines. Liability. Environmental violation if it led to runoff exposure. He handed me a stack of forms and a smile. I wasn't ready to press charges, but I wanted the option. Back home, I didn't rest. I built a secondary bypass, a failsafe. A hidden valve I could switch manually to toggle between clean water and cattle tank sludge. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was strategy. A fortress. Because if Karen had taught me anything, it's that some battles don't end. They pause. They mutate. So you prepare. You build stronger, deeper, smarter. Because the next time someone comes for what you built, they won't just meet resistance. They'll meet a system built by someone who already survived the first wave and is ready for the next. 3 days after the sludge storm dismantled Karen's backyard brunch dreams, I received a text from Bill, the retired engineer on the HOA board, the only one in that group with a spine not made of protocol and polished smiles. The message was brief, a screenshot of the agenda for an emergency HOA meeting. My name sat square in the middle of it, underlined and bolded, just below a line item titled Neighborhood Water Contamination, Accountability and Action. I wasn't even in the HOA, and yet there I was, center stage in Karen's latest attempt at reclaiming her crumbling throne. I didn't respond to Bill. I didn't need to. He knew I'd show up, and I knew Karen would make it the performance of a lifetime. I spent the afternoon preparing, not rehearsing speeches or printing threats, but assembling facts. Photos of Chuck rerouting my line. Still frames from the video footage, complete with timestamps. Water pressure logs. A full schematic of my land, with utility markings that made it clear as a sunrise that the pipe Karen had tapped wasn't anywhere near her jurisdiction. I stacked it all neatly into a folder and threw on my oldest pair of boots, one still crusted in barn dust and stubborn pride. If they were going to paint me as the villain, I'd show up like one. The rec center smelled like lemon cleaner and bureaucracy. Folding chairs in uneven rows, a dusty podium set in front of a whiteboard no one had touched since the last bake sale committee. Karen was already there, pacing like a general before a siege. She wore beige, her war color, shoulders squared, hair pulled back so tight it looked like a helmet. Her voice filled the room, rehearsed and shrill, calling me a saboteur, accusing me of biological retaliation and intentional harm to community property. I walked in mid-monologue. Every head turned. I didn't say a word. I just sat, crossed my arms, and waited. When it was my turn, I didn't defend myself. I simply handed out the evidence. Copies of the footage, the logs, the maps. Karen tried to interrupt, but her words started tripping over each other like someone drowning in their own script. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't gloat. Just presented facts. Then came the moment that turned everything sideways. Chuck walked in. I hadn't invited him. Someone had tipped him off. He looked nervous, eyes darting, hat in his hands like a child sent to the principal's office. Karen froze. For a second, I thought she might bolt. But she stood her ground, just long enough to watch Chuck confess. In front of everyone. Said she paid him cash, told him it was a temporary hookup, something harmless to keep her fountains running until the city sorted things out. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was surgical. Precise. Every board member looked at her, and in that second, something snapped. The illusion of control she had woven around herself for years unraveled like wet tissue. Bill stood up, cleared his throat, and said exactly what I was thinking. This is not leadership. This is theft. The vote wasn't even close. Unanimous. Karen was removed as HOA president pending a formal investigation. She didn't leave quietly. She stormed out, muttering about conspiracies, vendettas, and ungrateful neighbors. Her heels clacked down the hallway like an exclamation mark she couldn't quite land. Back home, I poured myself a drink and sat on the porch, watching the last rays of sun stretch across my land. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. Not yet, because people like Karen don't just retreat, they regroup. The following morning confirmed it. A black SUV pulled up to her house. 2 people in county-issued polos stepped out. One held a clipboard, the other a tablet. Inspectors. I watched them hover near the side yard where the illegal connection had been. They took notes, snapped photos. Karen followed them like a lawyer shadowing a jury, gesturing wildly, trying to steer the narrative. But the inspectors didn't look convinced. 15 minutes later, they left with more questions than answers. That afternoon, I got a knock at the door. Not angry, not frantic, just polite. I opened it to find one of the inspectors, a man named Adam. He introduced himself as a representative from the County Water Board. Said they'd received a report of contamination and potential environmental hazard. I invited him in, offered him coffee, and laid everything out: photos, footage, line schematics, the rerouted system, the sealed valve. He listened carefully, taking notes. When I showed him the cattle tank, now tagged and marked for livestock use only, he chuckled under his breath. "You're more organized than half my team," he said. I asked him if there would be consequences. He nodded. Said Karen had violated multiple codes: unauthorized cross-property utility connection, unsafe discharge, and misuse of private infrastructure. He couldn't give me a number yet, but the fines were coming. I didn't smile. I just nodded. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about closure. By sunset, Karen was pacing her yard again, phone in hand, barking into it like a general demanding reinforcements. But the troops never came. The neighborhood was watching now. Not in secret, but openly. They waved at me longer. Stopped to ask questions at the feed store. Someone posted a meme in the community group chat, Karen mid-spray, captioned, "When karma clogs your hose." The tide had turned. Even the people who once nodded along with her sermons now stayed quiet. Some even crossed the street to avoid her. The weight of her reputation, once built on HOA newsletters and intimidation, now sagged under the pressure of truth and manure. But she didn't give up. A few days later, she tried one last Hail Mary. A patrol car rolled up my driveway. A sheriff's deputy stepped out, calm, polite. Said there had been a complaint of malicious plumbing tampering. I told him I expected this. Invited him for a walk around the property. Showed him the sealed lines, the footage, the documentation. He laughed. Said it reminded him of his cousin's prank war in college. No report filed. Just a handshake and a warning to call if things escalated. They didn't. Not exactly. Karen held a community integrity meeting in her driveway 2 days later. Only 2 people showed up. One left after 10 minutes. The other just nodded politely and never came back. She handed out new flyers, typed in all caps, demanding an apology for psychological warfare. I kept one for the file. It sat next to the video of her slipping in the mud and the county inspector's note. Evidence, in case she decided to take this circus to court. Instead, I went quiet, focused on upgrades. Reinforced the fencing near the tank, installed another motion sensor, rerouted one more line to serve as a decoy in case someone got ambitious again. The system was smarter now. Tougher. Not just plumbing anymore, armor. And just when I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen was fading into silence, I got a call. A reporter. Local station. Said he'd read the blog post about the cattle tank justice story and wanted to do a human interest segment. Said it struck a nerve. People loved it. Not just for the revenge, but for the message, about boundaries, about standing your ground without drawing a weapon. I hesitated. Part of me wanted the chapter closed. But another part, the builder, the quiet watcher, knew it mattered. We filmed the piece in one afternoon. I wore the same boots from the HOA meeting, walked them through the setup, showed them the valve, the camera, the tank. They called it ingenious. I called it necessity. When the segment aired, it spread faster than I expected. Podcasts picked it up. Social pages reposted clips. My inbox filled with messages, people sharing their own stories of neighborhood tyrants, of stolen space, of finding small, quiet justice. And in that flood, I saw what Karen never did. That power doesn't come from rules or titles or who talks the loudest. It comes from knowing what you built and daring someone to try and take it. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the HOA meeting that stripped Karen of her manufactured authority, and although her voice no longer echoed through the neighborhood with the force of municipal scripture, I knew better than to assume it was over. People like her don't vanish, they recalculate. And sure enough, on a sticky Thursday morning, just after sunrise, I watched another government-marked vehicle pull into her driveway. This time it wasn't a water board inspector. It was a large white truck pulling a cylindrical tanker, and followed by two men in high-visibility vests with clipboards and slow, deliberate steps. Their boots squelched against the overly saturated lawn that once sparkled like a magazine cover, and now looked more like a flooded marshland. I didn't need to ask where they were going. They were here to pump out her backyard pond, the one she had secretly been feeding with water rerouted from my system. I stood behind my screen door with a cup of coffee, the steam curling up like a silent cheer, and watched as the tanker's engine roared to life. The scene was surreal. A massive hose ran from the truck to the rear of her house, where the once picturesque koi pond had been transformed into an unlicensed reservoir, now flagged for environmental violations. As the pump rattled and chugged, I caught glimpses of neighbors pretending to check their mail or sweep already clean porches just to watch the spectacle unfold. It was like our version of a red carpet event, only this one involved municipal code enforcement and the smell of pond scum. Karen didn't come outside at first. She waited, maybe hoping the operation would finish before too many people noticed. But when the tanker started sucking up more sludge than water, she burst out her back door, arms flailing, demanding answers. The workers ignored her. One pointed to a printed order from the county posted on the fence, clearly marked, laminated, undeniable. That afternoon, another knock came. This one softer. I opened the door to find Elise, a woman with sharp eyes and a tired smile, badge clipped to her shirt from the county's environmental division. She had a tablet in one hand and a folder in the other. After a brief introduction, she asked to see my water system firsthand. I walked her through everything, from the clean line to the now disconnected bypass, making sure to emphasize how the tank was clearly marked for livestock use only. She asked smart questions, the kind that told me this wasn't her first run-in with self-important suburban royalty. Before she left, she paused on the porch, glancing toward Karen's house like a person watching the final flickers of a dying fire. Then she said something that stuck with me. This isn't her first offense. We've had reports before. Minor stuff, unauthorized irrigation taps, redirection of runoff into public storm ditches. She's been bending rules for years. That changed something for me. Until that moment, I had thought of the water theft as a singular act of entitlement. But it wasn't. It was part of a pattern, a mosaic of selfishness painted over years. The pond, the illegal tap, the fake newsletters, even the weaponization of HOA meetings. It wasn't about water. It was about control. She didn't just want to live comfortably. She wanted to control the current, literally and metaphorically, of everyone around her. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me resolute. The next few days blurred into a strange calm. People who had once only nodded in passing now stopped to chat. Some brought over pie or biscuits. Others offered stories. One neighbor told me Karen had tried to fine him for storing a boat trailer inside his own garage. Another said she'd been reported for aesthetically disruptive patio furniture. It was like the entire neighborhood was slowly waking from a collective fog, realizing they had been governed by the illusion of authority wrapped in khaki and HOA bulletins. Bill called me one evening and asked if I'd consider attending future meetings as a guest advisor. Not a member, just a voice of reason. I politely declined. I had no desire to sit in plastic chairs while grown adults debated flowerbed regulations. But I appreciated the gesture. It meant the tide had turned for good. Then the invoice came. A white envelope, sealed with the county seal, and taped to Karen's door for all to see. I couldn't make out the details, but I didn't have to. Between the unauthorized tap, the contaminated runoff, and the environmental cleanup, she was likely looking at thousands in fines. Maybe more if the county pushed for civil damages. That night, I heard her yelling into the phone again, screaming about persecution and betrayal. But her voice was different now, frayed, desperate, like a flag left in the rain too long. No one responded. No one came. And then nothing. A week passed. Then another. Her lawn began to yellow, patches of it curling into brittle outlines where sprinklers once sang. The koi pond, now just a muddy depression, baked under the summer sun. Her famous hedge maze, once clipped to military precision, wilted into a snarl of dry twigs. The woman who had once dictated shrub heights and mailbox styles now disappeared into her house, blinds drawn, porch light off. Until one morning, I saw a moving truck parked in her driveway. I watched from the edge of my barn as two men loaded boxes into the back. Karen paced around them, barking occasional orders, but her voice lacked its usual sharpness. Her hair was tied up messily, her clothes hung loosely like they didn't want to be worn. Around noon, a real estate sign appeared in her yard. And by sunset, she was gone. No farewell. No drama. No final flyer dropped into mailboxes. Just an empty porch and the ghost of a reputation that collapsed under its own weight. The neighborhood changed after that. You could feel it. People started waving more. Gates were left open again. Kids rode their bikes in small packs down the road without someone yelling about noise levels. At the next HOA meeting, now held in a casual circle under a community shade tree, Bill announced new bylaws limiting executive authority and requiring unanimous votes on property-related actions. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. A recalibration. A signal that the community was no longer afraid of its own shadows. For me, the final chapter wasn't an act of revenge or an expose. It was a tree. I planted it right near the spot where Karen's illegal tap once pierced my line. A modest oak sapling. Small. Resilient. Years from now, it'll tower over that patch of land. But for now, it stands as a quiet reminder that boundaries matter. Not just the physical ones of fences and pipes, but the invisible ones we draw between self-interest and respect. And every morning when I walk past it with my coffee, I look at that little tree and know that while Karen's roots were shallow and hungry, this one will grow deep. Because justice, out here, doesn't always come from courtrooms or citations. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly where your water flows, exactly who tried to steal it, and exactly when to turn the valve. It had been almost a full month since the moving truck rolled away from Karen's driveway, leaving behind nothing but a dying lawn, a sagging fence, and a house that sat heavier than before, like it had absorbed all the noise she used to make and now had nothing left to say. The for sale sign disappeared after a week, replaced by a new one bearing the logo of a local realtor group, known for fast turnovers and no questions asked. I didn't bother to ask where she went. I figured wherever it was, it had rules she could try to manipulate and people she could try to impress, and that was enough closure for me. But her absence did something I didn't expect. It transformed the neighborhood in a way I hadn't realized we needed. It started with little things. The couple down the road who used to keep to themselves started leaving their porch light on and waving every evening. Someone brought over homemade jam, unsolicited but appreciated. Kids rode their bikes a little farther, a little freer. The fence posts stopped groaning under the weight of surveillance. One Saturday, the HOA held a community cleanup, not mandatory, no guilt-tripping flyers, just a quiet announcement on the neighborhood group page. People showed up with gloves, trash bags, and lemonade. We pulled weeds, patched cracks in the sidewalk, trimmed back trees that had overgrown the trailhead. There was laughter. Actual laughter. Not the performative kind Karen used to stage during her brunches, but the kind that comes from finding out your neighbor isn't just a fence away from you. They're human. I kept my distance, but I paid attention. I wasn't looking for praise or a parade. If anything, I wanted the opposite. The whole mess had taught me that the best kind of power is the kind no one notices until it's tested. Quiet strength. Unspoken lines. But still, word spread. People started sharing the story in whispers, then in chuckles, then in full-blown reenactments at barbecues. Someone drew a cartoon version of the Sludge geyser and taped it to the community bulletin board. I didn't mind. Humor, I learned, was the final stage of healing. Then came the knock. It was early evening, that soft gold hour when the land feels warm and the wind carries your thoughts farther than usual. A woman in a light flannel shirt and work boots stood on my porch, holding a folded piece of paper and a polite smile. She introduced herself as Maya, a reporter from a regional magazine focused on rural living, off-grid innovation, and small-town resilience. She'd read the online blog story, the one that told the water saga with just enough detail to make it sound mythical, and she wanted to do a follow-up. Not just on the prank, but on what it represented. I hesitated, told her I wasn't looking to be famous. She nodded and said, "I'm not here to make you famous. I'm here to remind people that boundaries matter." So we talked. I walked her through the evolution of my water system, the philosophy of doing things yourself even when no one's watching, the way community trust can rot if left untended. I showed her the oak sapling, now staked and growing slow but certain, its roots taking hold where deceit once burrowed. She asked thoughtful questions, not about Karen, but about consequence, preparation, and what it feels like when the thing you built becomes the thing you have to defend. The article came out a few weeks later. It didn't mention names. It didn't need to. The title read, Sludge, Sovereignty, and the Art of Rural Justice. It was honest, plain-spoken, and powerful. Neighbors started referring to the story simply as the incident. New folks moving in asked cautiously, "Is that where it happened?" pointing toward my fence. I'd nod, offer them a lemonade, and let them fill in the gaps however they needed to. One guy, a retired veteran who'd just bought a fixer-upper at the end of the lane, said, "I've never seen a community rally around a waterline before." I told him, that's because it wasn't about water. It was about where people decide to stop being walked on. In the following months, something deeper began to shift. The HOA, now under new leadership with actual transparency, started hosting quarterly forums, not meetings, forums, where people could speak without being silenced by agendas. They voted to add a community rainwater collection system near the park. Compost bins appeared beside the mailboxes. Bill organized a workshop on DIY water filtration. And through all of it, not a single flyer was shoved into my mailbox. Progress doesn't always look like technology or signs with buzzwords. Sometimes it looks like silence where shouting used to be. One morning, while repairing a section of fence where an old post had rotted, I noticed movement near the gas station just off the highway. A figure standing beside a pump, hunched slightly, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. There was something familiar in the posture, the energy, the way the shoulders rolled forward like a person used to pushing against things that didn't yield. It took me a moment to realize it was her, Karen, or at least a version of her. Her hair was shorter now, dulled down from that aggressive honey blonde to a quieter brown. She wore nondescript clothes, the kind that tried to blend in, but didn't quite succeed. Our eyes met across the lot, a flicker that didn't last more than a second. She looked away first, walked into the store without breaking stride. I didn't follow. I didn't wave. I just nodded barely, not with malice or satisfaction, but with acknowledgement. Not of her defeat, but of the fact that we had both survived each other. That was the last time I saw her. Not long after, the young couple who had moved into Karen's old house invited a few of us over for a backyard barbecue. The invite was handwritten, tucked politely into mailboxes with a note that said, "We'd like to know our neighbors, not their reputations." I brought a pie. We sat under string lights and shared stories that didn't come with footnotes or fine print. At some point, someone brought up the water saga, and the whole yard erupted in laughter when I mentioned the cattle tank. One of the new neighbors, half joking, said I should patent the sludge defense system. I told him I already had, right in my memory. By the time autumn rolled in, and the leaves began to dry and fall like brittle reminders of passing tension, things had settled into a rhythm. Mornings were quiet again. The birds came back to the feeder I'd ignored during the chaos. My sprinklers clicked on like clockwork, feeding the grass with clean, untainted water that ran deep and proud. And every once in a while, I'd catch someone slowing their car just a little as they passed my property, eyes lingering on the gate where the wooden sign still hung, "Private line." Tamper once, shame on you. Tamper twice, enjoy the sludge. It became something of a landmark. A symbol. Not of vengeance, but of resolve. Of what happens when someone finally says enough, and means it. I didn't need to post warnings anymore. The story had done that for me. And in a place like this, where hands build more than homes and silence means more than slogans, that story would outlive any sprinkler, any lawsuit, any misplaced sense of entitlement. Because out here, justice doesn't wear a robe or carry a gavel. Sometimes it wears boots, holds a wrench, and knows how to turn the right valve at exactly the right time.